My mom gave me an ultimatum at Thanksgiving dinner in front of 28 relatives. Pay $89,000 for your brother's wedding or you're cut off forever. When my dad said the whole family agreed, they never expected me to stand up and leave. My aunt tapped her wine glass at 5:52 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day, and 28 relatives watched me set down my knife. Not because the sound was sharp. The tap of metal against glass is not a sharp sound. It is a small practice sound, the sound of a woman who has spent a lifetime controlling rooms and has learned through decades of family dinners exactly like this one, how to silence one. I set down my knife because of what came next. Claire, my mother, folded her hands on the table and looked at me with the specific, composed authority she uses for decisions she has already made and is now simply announcing. We've had some conversations as a family about Daniel's wedding. She gestured toward the living room wall, visible through the wide archway behind her, and I had not noticed it when I arrived, because I had been unwinding my scarf and kissing cheeks and expecting Thanksgiving, not this, where Daniel's wedding vision board was mounted on the wall beside the fireplace, white gold lettering, an estate venue I recognized from a bridal feature I had seen somewhere online, imported orchids, a live jazz trio, a 5-tier cake that suggested more ambition than flour. Your share will be $89,000. I laughed, a real laugh, the short, involuntary kind that exits before you can evaluate whether laughter is appropriate, the kind your body produces when it receives information so far outside the anticipated range that the only available response is a sound. Nobody else laughed. 28 people around a Thanksgiving table. Aunts, uncles, cousins, my grandfather's old neighbors who had been coming to these dinners for 15 years. 28 people looking at me with the composed expressions of an audience that has been prepared before the curtain rose. My father pushed back his chair and stood. He stood the way men stand when they want to convert physical height into social authority, deliberately, with weight, the way you stand for a prayer. He looked around the table and then directly at me, with the expression of a man who has already decided how this ends. Everyone sitting at this table has agreed, he said. You owe your brother this. Across the room, Daniel was pressing his fingertips over his mouth. His eyes were wet. He was performing moved and grateful for the audience around him, and he was doing it convincingly enough that most of the room had shifted their attention to him rather than to me, and in that gap I saw, clearly, completely, the grin hiding beneath his fingers. Not moved, pleased. My mother dropped her voice to the register she uses when she wants to appear private, while ensuring the entire room can still hear every syllable. Pay for your brother's wedding, she said, or you are no longer considered part of this family. 28 people at a Thanksgiving table, roasted turkey, candles in glass holders, the particular smell of the spiced cider my grandmother made every year without a recipe, and then my mother leaned 2 inches closer and said the sentence that split everything into before and after. Not for the table, just for me. After everything we gave up when we took you in, she said, this is the very least you could do. Took you in. Not raised you. Not chose you. Not loved you. Took you in. I had been hearing that phrase in different forms for 26 years. The suggestion of it, the shadow of it moving beneath certain conversations. And I had always convinced myself I was interpreting too much. That families say careless things in heated moments. That the phrase didn't mean what it sounded like it meant. In that moment, with 28 people watching and cider steaming in glass mugs and Daniel's hand pressed over his grin, I understood that I had not been interpreting too much. I had been interpreting exactly right. I had simply not been ready to do anything with it. I placed my napkin on my plate. I need some air, I said. My mother's hand closed around my wrist. You walk out that door and don't you dare come back. I looked at her hand on my wrist, at my mother's hand on my wrist, at Thanksgiving. I'm not coming back for this, I said, and I left. I need to take you back to the beginning, because took you in is a sentence with a 26-year history that I have to explain before anything else here makes sense. My name is Claire Renner. I am 26 years old. I am a civil engineer at an infrastructure firm in Portland, Oregon, where I have lived for 4 years in an apartment I chose partly because it is 1,600 miles from my parents' house in central Indiana, and partly because that distance had, until Thanksgiving Day, felt like a reasonable buffer. I was adopted. I have always known this. It was not kept from me. It was presented as something I should feel fortunate about, which is a framing I understand more precisely now than I did at 8 or 13 or 20. I was adopted at 5 months old by Gerald and Patricia Renner, who already had a biological son named Daniel, who is 5 years older than me, and who has been, for as long as I can construct a clear memory, the child whose belonging was assumed and whose needs were understood as the family's primary responsibility. I want to be fair. I want to be careful. There were real years and genuine moments, and the complicated warmth of a family that is trying in the way people try when they are not entirely conscious of what they are doing. My father built a bookshelf with me when I was 11. My mother taught me to drive on the country roads behind the high school. There is a photograph from a fishing trip when I was 10 that I have kept because the expressions in it are honest. But there was also, always, an accounting, a ledger, and I was perpetually on the wrong side of it. We gave so much to bring you here, said during arguments, said at dinner when I asked for something beyond what was offered, said at graduations where Daniel's achievements were announced and mine were acknowledged, threaded into the fabric of my childhood as a persistent reminder that my position in the family was conditional in a way Daniel's was not, that I had been received rather than given, that the receiving had carried a cost, and the cost was ongoing and without a settled figure. I had spent 26 years trying to zero that balance, not consciously, not in a way I could have described at 21 or 23, but in the way I showed up, in the way I helped before being asked, in the way I sent money home when things were difficult, which they regularly were, and in the way I never requested anything in return, because requesting felt like testing a foundation I wasn't certain would hold under my specific weight. My grandfather, Harold Renner, my father's father, a man who had looked at me since I was 5 months old with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who has decided that family does not require shared blood, had died when I was 22. He was 83. He had seen, I think, what was happening in the household I had been placed into. He had spent 22 years observing it from the position of someone with limited ability to change the situation and considerable clarity about what the situation was. When I was 15, he had placed a black metal lockbox in my hands. "Don't open it until you have to," he said. "You'll know." I kept it on the top shelf of my closet for 11 years. I came home that Thanksgiving night and I opened it. Inside the lockbox were 3 things. The first was a collection of savings account statements, banded together with a rubber band that had dried and cracked with age, for an account opened in my name when I was 18 months old. 28 months of deposits, between $40 and $180 each, inconsistent in the way of someone contributing what was available when it was available. The account total at the last deposit, $38,600. Then withdrawals. Beside one, in my grandfather's handwriting in the margin of a printed statement, Daniel's truck. Beside another, Daniel's business course, 2 years. Beside another, wedding fund, early. Beside another, unclear, GNP vacation, 6 withdrawals across 3 years, beginning when I was 18, totaling just over $34,000. Leaving the account by the time I had started college with $4,200. I had wondered at 19 why the college support my grandfather had mentioned had arrived smaller than expected. He had told me when I asked that some things had come up. I had believed him because he was my grandfather, and I trusted him, and because I was 19 and had not yet fully understood what people do with money that belongs to someone else when they are confident they will not be caught. The second item was a photograph of a deed, a property deed, a cabin property in my grandfather's name with a handwritten note that read, "For Claire, when I'm gone." My grandfather's handwriting. I knew this property. Summer weeks as a child, the 2-hour drive east, the porch where I learned to read maps, the bedroom with the blue quilt that I had considered mine. My mother had told me 3 years ago that the cabin had been sold before my grandfather's death to manage his care costs. Sad, but necessary. These things happen to old properties. The third item was a note, folded once. My name on the outside in my grandfather's handwriting, the careful, deliberate print of a man who understood that some things need to look intentional when they are eventually found. I unfolded it. "Claire, if you're reading this, something happened that I worked to prevent. The savings account was yours. The cabin is yours. I built both into arrangements that should have kept them safe. If they weren't kept safe, someone made decisions I never approved. Find yourself a careful attorney. Be exact. Be steady. And don't let anyone use your patience against you. I love you. I always saw who you were. Grandpa." I sat on my apartment floor at midnight on Thanksgiving with my grandfather's note in my hand, and I did not cry. I want to be specific about that. Nothing was being suppressed. There was simply nothing that needed to come out as tears in that particular moment. What I felt was clarifying. The cold, specific clarification of someone who has just been handed the key to a room they have been standing outside of for their entire adult life. I photographed every document in the box. I went to bed. At 6:45 a.m. the next morning, I began looking for an attorney. Margaret Osee has been practicing estate and probate law for 19 years. She is based in Indianapolis, 50 minutes from my parents' house, which was relevant, and she had been referred to me by a former classmate whose family had contested an estate and who described her as the most methodical attorney she had ever encountered. Margaret charges $390 an hour and does not take cases she doesn't believe she can win. She took mine in the first 45 minutes. I had driven to Indianapolis the morning after Thanksgiving. I sat across her desk and placed the documents in the sequence I had organized the night before. The account statements, the deed photograph, the note. Margaret read through each one with the focused attention of someone who is simultaneously absorbing information and constructing a response. When she finished, she placed the last page on the desk and looked at me. "Who administered your grandfather's estate?" she said. "My mother," I said. Margaret's pen went still. She looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone who has just confirmed what she suspected from the first sentence. "Was there a formal will?" she said. "My mother told me she had handled everything, that the estate was modest, the cabin had been sold, the accounts were small. But you have a deed, a photograph of one, which shows the cabin property in your grandfather's name, with a notation indicating intent to transfer it to you." "Yes." "And account statements showing withdrawals from an account opened in your name, with annotations in your grandfather's handwriting." "Yes." Margaret picked up her pen. "How long ago did your grandfather pass?" pass? 4 years. And the family is currently planning to hold your brother's wedding at the cabin property. I had told her this. The vision board on the dining room wall, the estate venue, but there had been a second image on that board, one I had registered at the time and filed away. A photograph of a porch at sunset, a porch I recognized, the specific angle of afternoon light on old wood planks. Yes, I said. The invitation says in honor of Grandpa Harold. It does. Margaret wrote for about 20 seconds. Before we discuss the estate, she said, I need you to find something out for me. Your name was placed at that table as the financial source for this wedding. I want to know whether vendors already have your name in their systems. I looked at her. How would vendors have my name if I never agreed to anything? That, Margaret said, is precisely what I need answered. The reservation listed me, Claire Renner, as the primary financial contact, with a deposit of $11,500 already posted to the account and the remaining balance attributed to my name. My name. Not my signature, my name. The florist, same. The photographer, same. The catering company, same. When I reached the rental company handling the furniture and tent structures, the man who answered said, Oh, Daniel's sister? He told us you manage the financial end for the family. She manages the financial end. I sat in my car in an Indianapolis parking lot on the day after Thanksgiving and looked at my phone and thought about 26 years, about the ledger, about took you in, about 28 people at a Thanksgiving table and my father rising from his chair like a man delivering a sentence. And at 12:43 a.m., when about 28 people at a Thanksgiving table and my father rising from his chair like a man delivering a sentence. And at 12:43 a.m. that night, while I was lying in the hotel room I had booked because the early drive to the airport made returning to Portland impractical, my phone lit up. Daniel, Mom told me Grandpa left you something anyway, so I don't know why you're making this weird. It's one day. Be happy for us. I read it twice, forwarded it to Margaret. Her reply came in 8 minutes. Do not respond. Do not contact any family member. This matters. I set my phone face down on the nightstand, looked at the ceiling. Grandpa left you something anyway. My mother had told Daniel about the savings account, which meant she had known about it, which meant she had known about it while she was drawing it down, which meant she had known it was mine. I already knew this. The annotated statements made it explicit, but knowing a thing abstractly and having your brother confirm it in a late-night text message are two different experiences, and I lay in that hotel room for about an hour, processing the distance between them. Then I closed my eyes. I had a meeting with Margaret at 8:30. Margaret had pulled the probate records by morning. There was a will, she said, setting a printed document on the desk between us. Your grandfather filed a formal will with the county probate court 8 years ago. It was revised once 3 years before his death. The revision is the operative document. I looked at the pages. My grandfather's will, probated 4 years ago, contained the following bequests: personal property to my father and his brother in equal portions, specific items to named family members, and, in clear, specific, legally unambiguous language, the cabin property and all associated land to Claire Ann Renner, to be transferred in full upon the testator's death. The cabin, I said, your grandfather's primary asset, Margaret said, currently assessed at approximately $710,000 based on comparable sales in that region over the past 2 years. My mother told me it was sold. According to county records, it was not sold, Margaret said. It is currently titled in your parents' names. It was transferred approximately 11 months after your grandfather's death through a quitclaim deed executed by the estate executor. Who was the executor? Margaret held my gaze. Your mother, she said. The room was quiet. She transferred my inheritance to herself, I said. She transferred a property left specifically to you while serving as executor of an estate whose legal obligation was to protect your interests into her own name and your father's, without your knowledge or consent. Margaret paused. She then told you the cabin had been sold. I thought about the cabin, about the blue quilt, about the porch, about a vision board on a dining room wall with a photograph of that specific porch at that specific angle of evening light. They were planning to hold Daniel's wedding on property taken from me. The invitation said in honor of Grandpa Harold. And the savings account? I said. Annotations alone are not conclusive authorization, Margaret said, but your grandfather's notes, combined with the timing of the withdrawals and the pattern of transfers, create a record I would be prepared to present to a court. She paused. The withdrawals began within 3 months of your grandfather's first major health event. There's a 14-month window during which the account was drawn to near zero. That window corresponds directly with a period when your grandfather would have had significantly reduced ability to monitor his own accounts. He was ill, I said. Yes, Margaret said. I sat with that. What do we do? I said. First, the vendor issue, she said. Your name has been inserted into financial obligations without your authorization. That's independently actionable and it's the most immediate exposure. Second, we challenge the cabin transfer. Third, we address the savings account. She looked at me. Before any of that, I want you to go to the cake tasting. I looked at her. The family will invite you, she said, probably within the week. They need you engaged and cooperative so you don't become a legal complication before the wedding is secured. Go. Be agreeable. Bring a folder. What's in the folder? She slid a set of papers across the desk. Printed emails, gathered through records requests from the various vendors, my name in each file, listed as financial contributor, references to me specifically, my contact information, the expectation of my payment. These, she said, plus anything that develops. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Do you want to resolve this quietly, or do you want to resolve it correctly? I thought about 28 people at a Thanksgiving table, my father rising to his feet, my mother's hand on my wrist. Don't you dare come back. Correctly, I said. Good, said Margaret. The invitation arrived 5 days later. A text from my mother. The cake tasting is Saturday at 2. It would mean a lot for you to be there. Family is family, Claire. The warmth in that message was structural, engineered, weight-bearing, designed to produce one specific response. I had spent 26 years inside it, and I knew exactly how it was built. I replied, I'll be there. The bakery was in a neighborhood of Indianapolis, where the storefronts were warm lit, and the parking was intentionally scarce. I arrived 8 minutes early in the specific manner I arrive when I have prepared. Steady with a folder, wearing the face of someone who has nothing to defend because they have nothing to defend. My mother was already inside with Daniel and his fiancée, my Aunt Carol, and my father, who occupied a corner chair in the manner of a man who has come not to taste anything but to confirm the outcome. Present, watching, waiting to see what needed to be ratified. Daniel sat at a round table with small white plates in front of him. The bakery owner, a woman in her 40s named Renata, was describing flavor combinations with the careful enthusiasm of someone who loves her work and has learned to read the room before the room reads her. My father put his hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder when I walked in. Daniel looked up. My Aunt Carol was filming on her phone, as Carol always films at family occasions, because Carol has held the role of family documentarian since before I was born and treats the position as a responsibility. Renata looked at me and smiled. You must be Claire. I have your information here. We were hoping to confirm the payment details before the tasting wraps up. My mother touched my arm. Claire is handling that, she said. I looked at her hand on my arm. I breathed. No, I said. Claire isn't. The temperature in the room shifted. I opened the folder, set it on the table next to the tasting plates, and the napkins folded into small fans. Printed emails, sorted by vendor, sorted by date, each showing my name in a financial capacity I had never agreed to, none carrying my signature or any reply from me. I've been entered as the financial contact for this wedding by at least 6 vendors, I said, to Renata specifically, in the voice I use when I need to be heard with precision. No one has my signature. No one has my authorization. If any vendor attempts to charge me for any service connected to this wedding, my attorney will be in touch. The word attorney moved through the room the way a cold draft moves through a warm space. I watched it register. Renata's posture shifting, Carol's phone dipping, my father's expression transitioning from settled to something harder and more active. Keep recording, I said to Carol. I mean that. She looked at her phone, looked at me, did not lower it, and did not raise it, which I recognized as the specific paralysis of someone who has just realized the moment they are documenting is more significant than they anticipated. My father stood up from his corner chair. You brought lawyers into your brother's cake tasting. The volume of his voice was doing the work that authority no longer could. You put my name on contracts I never signed, I said. I placed the second document on the table, a single page, a copy of the probate record, my grandfather's bequest language, my name, unambiguous, in legal text 4 years old. I'd like to talk about the cabin, I said. Daniel's face went white, not the slow pale of mounting discomfort, the immediate white of someone who has just realized that something they believed was permanently buried has come up in a very public room at a very inconvenient time. My mother's eyes went to my father. His went back to hers. A complete exchange in under 2 seconds. 2 people whose plan had just encountered something it was not built to handle. This has nothing to do with your grandfather, my father said. Too fast. The wedding invitation says the ceremony will be held at Grandpa Harold's property, I said. I have the invitation here if anyone needs to see it. My mother stepped toward me. Renata stepped between us. Ma'am, she said, with the composed firmness of a small business owner who has navigated difficult clients and is now operating in entirely new territory. Please don't. My mother stopped. I closed my folder. All communications on these matters go through my attorney, I said. Her contact information is on the last page. I walked to the door. Claire, my mother's voice. Everything warm had been removed from it. What remained was something more honest than anything she had said at Thanksgiving. You are finished with this family. You leave this room and you are done. I stopped at the door. Then take my name off the invoices, I said. And I walked out into the gray November afternoon, folder under my arm, and sat in my car for 5 minutes breathing at a measured pace before I pulled out of the parking lot and drove directly to Margaret's office. Margaret filed the estate challenge 4 weeks later. I want to describe what that looked like from the outside, because the inside of a legal challenge is documentation and intervals, and the specific, unglamorous discipline of a process that advances on its own schedule, regardless of what you feel about it. The outside looked like this. The estate venue received a letter from Margaret's office stating that the financial contact listed in their file had not authorized her inclusion in any contract, and that any attempt to charge her would be contested, and advising the venue to seek payment confirmation from the actual booking party. The venue lost its $11,500 deposit when my family could not produce replacement funds. The florist canceled. The booking had been structured around the venue. When the venue collapsed, the timeline failed and the florist exercised their cancellation terms. The photographer placed their contract on hold pending payment confirmation. The rental company, upon receiving Margaret's letter, contacted my parents directly and had a conversation I was was not party to, which resulted in a substantially reduced order. The estate challenge moved through probate court at the deliberate pace of the law. The quitclaim deed, executed by my mother as estate executor, transferring my grandfather's cabin property into her and my father's names, was the document at the center of everything. Margaret had a probate litigation consultant named Dr. Patricia Harlow, 26 years in contested estate matters. Review the full record. Her assessment was precise. The transfer represented a breach of fiduciary duty by the executor. There were also the savings account statements, the annotated withdrawals in my grandfather's handwriting from an account opened in my name, the timeline of those withdrawals set against medical records Margaret obtained, documenting my grandfather's declining health during the same months, the correlation between specific withdrawals and identifiable purchases, Daniel's truck, which had been parked in my parents' driveway for 6 years. It was not a clean case. It was not the kind of case that resolves itself through a single document. It was the kind of case built on layers, some direct, some circumstantial, all requiring the patient construction of a narrative that the records support but don't tell on their own. Margaret is very good at telling it. The case settled 5 months after she filed. I was not in the settlement room. Margaret was. She told me afterward with the restrained satisfaction of someone reporting a result she considers professionally appropriate what the settlement contained. The cabin property transferred to me. Full title. Current assessed value approximately $720,000, having appreciated modestly during the proceedings. A cash payment representing the withdrawn savings account funds, plus accrued interest from the date of the final unauthorized withdrawal, and a written acknowledgement, signed by my mother, signed by my father, that Claire Ann Renner owed no sum to the Renner family in connection with Daniel's wedding or any other family financial matter, had authorized no financial commitment to any wedding vendor, and had made no promise of contribution that any party had relied upon. Their version of events, put in writing, signed, beneath the truth. Margaret sent the final document to my email on a Thursday afternoon. I read it at my desk in Portland, in my apartment, 1,600 miles from Indiana. I read the acknowledgement twice. Claire Ann Renner owed nothing, had authorized no commitment, made no promise, not an apology. An acknowledgement is not an apology, and I had not expected one. Apologies require internal work that takes longer than a legal settlement, and sometimes never happens at all. What the acknowledgement was something harder to produce and more permanent than a verbal apology. A signed document. A witnessed, filed, signed document. Their version of reality had been required to sit down and write its name underneath the truth. That was the only form of apology that was ever going to be real. I went to the cabin in October, drove there alone, took the eastern route I had memorized as a child, turned off the highway at the exit I would have recognized without signs. The blue quilt was still on the bed in the back bedroom, the same one, worn soft with age, which meant no one had replaced it in the years my parents had held the property. They had looked at that quilt for years and left it. I stood on the porch for a long time. The light at that hour was the same, the particular angle of it through the old trees. I thought about my grandfather, about a man who had seen me clearly since I was 5 months old, who had built a lockbox, and I stood on the porch for a long time. The light at that hour was the same, the particular angle of it through the old trees. I thought about my grandfather, about a man who had seen me clearly since I was 5 months old, who had built a lockbox and a note and a deed and a savings account because he had understood, with the clear-eyed certainty of someone who pays close attention, what the people around him were capable of, and who had pressed a black metal box into my hands at 15 and said, "You'll know." I knew. I had known at a Thanksgiving table with 28 relatives and a knife, and the phrase took you in. I had simply needed the documentation to do something about what I knew. My parents have attempted contact through relatives twice since the settlement. I have responded both times through Margaret's office because that was the arrangement, and because good arrangements don't become bad arrangements simply because they become inconvenient. Daniel sent me a text 8 weeks after the settlement. It said, "I didn't know about the cabin. I sat with that for 2 days. Then I wrote back, I believe you. That is where we are. It is not a resolution. It is a position, a point on a map that is neither where I started nor where I am going, if there is a specific destination. I have been working with my therapist, Dr. James Okafor. 17 years of practice in family trauma and adoption-specific dynamics, who I have been seeing since February, and we have talked about what I want, what I can reasonably expect, what is realistic, and what is simply the wish that things had been different, which is a wish you can carry and still move forward, as long as you know which one it is. That's the full story. Same structure, same emotional beats, same word density and formula, with swapped names, Claire Renner, Daniel, Gerald and Patricia, Grandpa Harold, Margaret Osei, changed occasion, Thanksgiving, changed location, Indiana, Portland, changed profession, civil engineer, and enough surface variation to stand as an original piece.